So, if I'm here, you know that preacher is digging way down the barrel to find somebody. Chris said I was 12th on the list. I don't know if I'm that high, but here we are. So, if you want to turn to John chapter 9, I thought about treating this like a Sunday school lesson, and we may or may not do that, but the problem is, in our Sunday school class, there are many times, we get sidetracked very easily in our Sunday school class. I think it was probably 6-7 weeks ago, we were getting ready to look at a spot in the book of Ephesians, so I told them to turn to Ephesians chapter 2 or whatever. And that was the extent of our Sunday school lesson that day. We get sidetracked very easily. And that's okay at times. That's not a problem. But we won't get sidetracked tonight, I don't think. Jeff's not here, so he won't sidetrack us. So we're going to look at most of the chapter, but it's going to go very quickly. So I'll have your heads going up and down, up and down. So I apologize for that, but we'll start in verse 1. So John chapter 9, verse 1. It says, "And as Jesus passed by, he saw a man which was blind from his birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, Master, who did sin, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" So as we look at this story, obviously this is the story of the blind man that Jesus is going to restore his sight. But you'll notice that just something very obvious. How long was this man blind? Since birth. Now, we don't know how old he is. We assume he's of adult age. He's called a man. So we're going to give it at least 18 years. But regardless, there was never a time when he had sight and lost it from a disease or whatever, but he was blind from birth. I find that interesting because as we go through some other spots here in this chapter, we don't get the full story of this blind man and what happens to him after he receives his sight. You would think that it would be some grand, miraculous thing, and even he acts like it is kind of no big deal, which is kind of odd. But so he has this blindness from birth. Verse 2 says, "And his disciples asked him." Notice that it is not his apostles, it's his disciples asked him. Now, that doesn't mean to say that there weren't some apostles a part of this crowd, but we're just talking disciples here. And so then they asked this question that seems quite odd to me. It says, who sinned? His parents or this man himself? Well, that sounds like a silly question because if he was blind at birth, it's not like he sinned right away and then became blind. The question just doesn't make any sense. But they ask it, and it almost seems like they're looking for an answer, but not really. So verse 3 starts Jesus' answer in this story. He says, "Neither hath this man sinned, nor his parents, but that the works of God should be made manifest in him." Important part of the last part of that answer is important. Verse 4 gets in kind of the meat of what we're going to talk about. So it says, "I must work the works of him that sent me while it is day. The night cometh when no man can work." So we sing that song in our song book, in our hymnal. Paul, I can't remember the name of that song. "Work for the night is coming." Yeah, I don't know that I could. But so we sing that song, and it comes from this passage here. But his answer is, "I must work the works of him that sent me while it is day. The night cometh when no man can work." What in the world do you think he means by the end of that phrase when he says, "The night cometh when no man can work"? You might want to throw out a suggestion of what he think he's talking about there. Well, even Christ himself says he's got to be at his Father's business, right? He's got to be working. When will Christ's work be finished on this earth? Or when was it finished? At his death. So for us, our work as believers, our work is finished when we're dead. Okay, so that's what he's meaning by this verse here. You got to get the work done, and you got to stay at it until you're dead. Which means that as believers, our work is never done. Or at least it should never be done. It doesn't matter what age you are. It doesn't matter your physical condition. There's work to be done, and he says it's to be done until the night comes, and for us, the night cometh when we're dead. So then that begs the question is, well, what is the work? Anybody want to throw out a guess on that? Okay. What's that? Yes. Certainly a part of it. You might want to throw out anything else. Not that Randy's wrong, but I think we can continue. Oh, come on. What's that? Praying. Okay. Yes. I'm going to throw a stab at it and say it's anything God asks you to do. It could be, well, we have our resident cleaning lady here. Your work could be cleaning the church. It could be doing the preaching. It could be Sunday school. It could be, you name the thing. If there's a task to be done, it requires work. So I think that our work as believers is anything God's asking us to do. It can change. It probably will change throughout your spiritual walk. But the point is, all of us as believers have work to do, and we're supposed to be at it until we're dead. Verse 5, as long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. So he's kind of given two things here as to why we are to work. Did you catch the first one in verse 3? Why? What's the purpose of our work? So that God may be manifested. Okay? So when that happens, when God is manifested, an obvious result should be that others see who he is and have a desire and want to come to him. That's why we manifest him. And we do so by, verse 5, by being a light of the world. Christ clearly says he was a light of the world, and by default, we as believers, we as disciples, we as Christ followers are light of the world as well. Verse 6, when he had thus spoken, he spat on the ground and made clay of the spittle. To me, this is an encouraging part for the blind man that he could not see this process. I think that would be quite disgusting. But he puts it on the blind man's eyes, and he gives him a command in verse 7, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which is by interpretation sent. He went his way, therefore, and washed and came seeing. So, let's read verse 8, and then we'll back up. The neighbors, therefore, and they which were before had seen him, that he was blind, said, is not this he that sat and begged? So I'm gonna ask, put some of the people in our class on the spot here. Where do you think this man might be begging on a continual basis? Where at in the city? At the gate, okay? We're talking about at the temple, right? Herod's temple. And that was a place where a lot of people congregated. And if you were somebody looking for a handout, you would go to the temple because lots and lots of people there are at the temple. All right? So I think that's where this is taking place. Could be wrong on that, but I think it would be a pretty logical guess. At any rate, it's obvious that people know who he was, who he is. They know his condition, and they're quite familiar that he is a blind man and has been blind a long time. Verse 9. Some said, "This is he." Others said, "He is like him." But he said, "I am he." It's kind of funny. The blind says, "No, it's me, really." But you notice that so far, after he got his sight, there was no hurrah, no wow, what a miracle, or none of that kind of thing. And sometimes I wish the Bible would put in that kind of stuff, and I guess it doesn't for a reason, but I would like to have seen that blind man's reaction when he's looking at the sun for the first time in the sky and all the things around him. That would have been pretty cool. Verse 10. Therefore said they unto him, "How were thine eyes opened?" Verse 11, he answered and said, "A man that is called Jesus made clay and anointed mine eyes, and said unto me, Go to the pool of Siloam and wash. And I went and washed, and I received sight." Verse 11 starts several verses where we see that a lot of people don't get it. They didn't get Jesus. They didn't get who he was. They didn't get who he claimed to be. There was a big disconnect. And I think that verse 11 starts this disconnect even with the blind man himself. He didn't quite understand what was going on here. Because you see the phrase that he uses in verse 11. He says, he answered and said, "A man that is called Jesus." He's just another man to him. There's no relationship thing there at all. I don't know if Jesus had seen the blind man before. Probably had. I don't know. But there's no relationship there. As we keep reading, I think you're going to see that the blind man wasn't the only one who missed it. So, verse 12, then said they unto him, "Where is he?" He said, "I don't know. I know not." Verse 13, they brought to the Pharisees him that aforetime was blind, and it was the Sabbath day when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. Not on the Sabbath day. Oh, here we go. We're going to see what the Pharisees have to say about this. So, let's see. What did it say? Verse 14? Yeah, verse 14. It was the Sabbath day when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. Verse 15. Then again the Pharisees also asked him how he had received his sight. He said unto them, "He put clay upon mine eyes, and I washed, and do see." Therefore said some of the Pharisees, "This man is not of God, because he keepeth not the Sabbath day." Oh, you see how the Pharisees missed it? No surprise, I guess. But so far we got the blind man himself. We got the Pharisees who weren't getting it. Let's continue on. "This man is not of God, because he keepeth not the Sabbath day." Others said, "How can a man that is a sinner do such miracles?" What a disgraceful statement. Calling Jesus a sinner. And there was a division among them. Verse 17, they say unto the blind man again, "What sayest thou of him that he hath opened thine eyes?" He said, "He is a prophet." But the Jews did not believe concerning him. So here we go. We got the blind man, we got the Pharisees, and now we got the Jews who just don't get it. Verse 18. But the Jews did not believe concerning him that he had been blind and received sight until they called the parents of him that had received his sight. You would think the parents would be overjoyed and excited. Not really. Verse 19. And they asked them, saying, Is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then doth he now see? His parents answered them and said, We know that this is our son, and that he was born blind. But by what means he now seeth, we know not. Or who hath opened his eyes, we know not. He is of age, ask him. He shall speak for himself. They missed it. We got the blind man, we got the Pharisees, we got the Jews, we got the parents. All missing the big picture here. Unbelievable. Well, let's keep going. Verse 22. These words spake his parents because they feared the Jews, for the Jews had agreed already that if any man did confess that he was Christ, he should be put out of the synagogue. Therefore said his parents, He is of age, ask him. There's some strong parents for you right there. Verse 24, Then again called they the man that was blind and said unto him, Give God the praise. We know that this man is a sinner. Those blasted Pharisees. They're, on one side of their mouth they're saying, Give God the glory. And the other side of their mouth they're basically saying, God's a sinner. Calling Jesus a sinner. It's awful. Verse 25. He answered and said, Whether he be a sinner or no, I know not. One thing I know, that, whereas I was blind, now I see. Then said they to him again, What did he do to thee? How opened he thine eyes? He answered them, I have told you already, and you did not hear. Wherefore would you hear it again? Will you also be his disciples? I think that's a funny statement. He knows quite well that the Pharisees wouldn't want to be disciples of Jesus. And he's like, we want to be disciples? I think that's kind of a funny statement. But verse 28, Then they reviled him and said, Thou art his disciple, but we are Moses' disciples. Oh, how grand they are. It's just so baffling how easily they don't want to accept Christ. And I got thinking, that happens with us a lot too. If we're honestly doing the work of the Lord, there's going to be quite a lot of people in our way who are not interested. They don't see it. They don't get it. They don't see the big picture. And that could be quite a discouragement. But I think that no matter what work it is that God calls us to do, we are to be faithful in that, and we are to do it regardless of how people respond to it. If we're faithful to do what he's called us to do, let God take care of the rest of it. If he has intentions and a plan for someone to come to Christ because of what we do, then, that's great. But I guess what I'm saying is, we're not to be doing the salvation part. That's God's business. We're just supposed to be faithful in the work that he's called us to do to get to that point for somebody to accept him. So let's go down to verse 20. I think I'm at verse 29. We know that God spake unto Moses, As for this fellow, we know not from whence he is. The man answered and said unto them, Why herein is a marvelous thing, that you know not from whence he is, and yet he hath opened mine eyes. Finally, it starts to click a little bit for him of this miracle that took place, and he calls it a marvelous thing. Verse 31, Now we know that God heareth not sinners, but if any man be a worshiper of God, and doth his will, him he heareth. since the world began, was it not heard that any man opened the eyes of one that was born blind? Basically, he's asking, have you ever heard of anybody ever causing a blind man to see? And he's finally starting to get it, that this Jesus fellow that helped him out performed a miracle. And he's more than just a Jesus fellow. Okay? And that's that's God's part. That's him doing his work that we can't do. We're supposed to be doing the sometimes the dirty labor part, right? So it takes us to verse 33. If this man were not of God, he could do nothing. And that's an incredible statement. Now he's giving God the glory. And he's understanding who Jesus really is. They answered and said unto him, Thou wast altogether born in sins, and dost thou teach us? And they cast him out. As if to say, we're not sinners. And the Pharisees do away with him and cast him out. They just never got it. Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and when he had found him, he said unto him, I like the fact that Jesus went and sought him out. Because obviously he knew that his work wasn't done yet, right? So he got the man taken care of physically, but now he's going to go find him and take care of his soul. So verse 36, he answered and said, Who is he, Lord, that I might believe on him? And Jesus said unto him, Thou hast both seen him, and it is he that talketh with thee. Jesus just proclaims who he is. Verse 38, he said, Lord, I believe, and he worshipped him. I think that's the moment of his salvation right there. But to me, that's an amazing part. Sometimes we work within the church and we do, we work Awana and we work with these kids, and we never see sometimes the I don't know if the end result is the right phrase or not, but we don't see sometimes where the kids end up later in life, We don't see sometimes that their salvation, maybe they become a preacher, or maybe they, whatever it is. We don't see the next step with them sometimes. And I think sometimes we think that our work is not that great, or we don't accomplish that much in our work, or whatever. But again, it's Jesus doing that next step, and he just wants and asks us to stay faithful in that first step. So I'll just ask you a few questions here to wrap it up. So how long do we do our work? Till we're dead. Yeah. Why do we do the work? So that he might be manifested. Yep. Glorify him. Hoping that as an end result, someone would come to him. And then, just a reminder, sometimes our work may go unnoticed, and you get discouraged. But just know that God's watching. He sees what you're doing. He sees the work you're doing. He sees how faithful you are in the work. And he just asks you to do it. And if we have to do it until we're dead, then so be it. So that's what I got for you this evening. Nothing too exciting, but I thought it was an interesting spot in Scripture. So we'll look at our prayer list.